Performance Expo. What a great video dealing with cylinder heads, making that horsepower, and now we're going to transition into a roundtable discussion about how to find that horsepower is in on the dyno. Lake, got Mark Cronquist, we got Ben, Jon Kaase jumping in, Jason Line, we pulled him back, he was out the door, we just dragged him right back in. And I have the best seat in the house for a great conversation. Guys, it already started. They're talking about, when and how, and don't make one more pull. That's what that's what, like, one more pull is the worst word you can say. But this is pretty amazing. And the engine that we're going to discuss, or at least one of them, is your dad's.
Right. So this kind of whole thing came up this summer, actually, when I saw Jason. We were at KB. We were honing Dad's block. That it was down so much on power from what Dad had thought it was. And we actually were able to find the dyno sheets. Rick Fred over at RF Engines had worked for Bob Cronin, knew where all the files were. So we actually found the original dyno sheets. And, I've hung around Ben enough that I know you got to do some math on this stuff. So I started looking at the dyno sheets, and I'm like, something doesn't quite add up. And then I saw Jason at KB, and he's like, oh, I know exactly what it was. And
did I say exactly?
I don't know if you said exactly. I'm paraphrasing for you, Jason.
It could be.
It could be, right. So, and you kind of mentioned it in the hidden horsepower segment earlier about the strain gauge and the lack of temperature compensation in the old days with those dynos, and how that may have given people a false reading. So expand on that a little bit, if you don't mind.
It definitely happened back then. I learned this from the self-proclaimed greatest dyno operator in the world.
I am. I was.
Self-proclaimed or the greatest?
Both.
Okay.
Well, back in the day, my brother and I, he had a 428 Cobra Jet Ford, and the headers on the Ford went real close together in the back. So we did a cam braking on the engine, and by the time we were done with the cam brake and made a few pulls, and the engine picked up like 30 horse, which would be, the engine was maybe a 500 horse engine at the time. It was such a large percentage, it was like, 30 horse. It was massive, right? So we're all excited. Of course, we want to believe it, right? Because you want to believe. So we go to the track, and it's a solid 0.2 slower, right? It ran terrible. So we talked to all of our expert friends and people who we respect in the industry, and they say, just because it makes more power doesn't mean it'll accelerate and blah blah blah. So, which none of that stuff really made any sense to me. So years later, we took the same engine. We had a different kind of dyno back then, and we trusted this dyno. So we took the same engine and we did the test in reverse, and instead it lost 30 horse. So, which made sense. It correlated with the racetrack, but it was. And then Mark taught me later on, it was all to do with the fact that the hotter this the strain gauge got, the more power the engine made. And because the header was right next to the strain gauge, the longer we did the cam braking for, if we'd ran another 20 minutes, it might have made 50 horse. Who knows? But anyway, that was the gist of it. So it was a good lesson learned. So
when you told me that, the light bulb went on my head, because I remember looking at all the dyno sheets. I'm like, oh, they went from the dyno headers way out here to the race headers back here, and they did 15 something different pulls just on headers, different tri-wise and all that. And I'm like, oh, all of this is just making it hotter and hotter and hotter. So how do we go from 656 on the fourth pull with old Molly rings? It was broken in then, to 722. That's a big gain. I'm not buying that.
Day.
That's a great day.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, as somebody who's testing, right, we sort of want to believe sometimes. What you really got to do is want to know the truth, and sometimes it takes a while for it to come out.
It seems to be a lot easier when you're testing an engine that you didn't build, though, right?
You're much more skeptical then,
Absolutely.
right?
Well, but when you gain, it's like you're the hero.
Oh,
look what I did here. I came to the conclusion, we never have bad dyno days. We always have good dyno days. The motors always make more power. It's good. Usually when they lose power, it's bad. It's bad, but it's like everybody, the dyno's off today. No, it usually isn't. It's usually a day when it shows more. There's something usually wrong with it on those days.
Well, I worked for a guy that would bitch and piss and moan if the engine was off 1 or 2 horse, and you had to keep working on it and get it back there. So 2 horse, that was a trailer rider, Are
you looking at me?
I'm pretty sure that's what he was getting at.
Well, some of the older dynos,
all your power is taken off a little aluminum link that's about this long. It's a little strain gauge.
Yeah.
And that's where all the torque comes from. Well, it's aluminum, and aluminum stretches as it gets hot.
Right.
So it'll keep adding to it. And we were guilty of the same thing. We'd run big engines, and the absorber would boil a little water and stuff because it really wasn't quite good enough for what we were doing. And so it would get hot. And we'd make a dyno pull, we'd make another one. But by the end, we'd go home late at night, and we were really looking good.
Oh, yeah. Come in the next morning, it wasn't, right?
Exactly. You come in the next morning, it was 30 or 40 worse, and we didn't do anything. Well, what's wrong? Well, what was wrong was it kept getting hotter and hotter from the thing, because it's making heat. And that heat went into that thing, but that's not an issue today because all that stuff's compensated for.
So,
it's
Mark,
done a different way.
What's the story where you learned that?
Learn what?
You found out about this, right? So Jason said you told him about it. So when did that happen to you that you had to go fishing for it?
And we just did the same thing what John just said. We'd come in and go. We'd end the night making, a cup motor at that time was probably making 750 or something. Come in next morning, it's making 730, and you're like, okay, well, what's different with the tune? Well, then we started buying air systems that the temperature was the same every day, and then we bought this system to do the humidity the same every day, and we're like, okay, how can it be 20 hours? Well, then you just start looking at it, and I think one time we actually put the weights on the dyno one time when it was hot. Went, okay, why is these off?
That can't
now?
be right. Yeah.
Then I was like, oh, measure that thing, and then you start moving it or changing the material or doing something or buying a different dyno that doesn't have it that way. And I think all dyno companies got better and smarter as they got older and said, well, we can't do this. And, everybody evolved. But I'm pretty sure it was the same thing like John said. You're the king of the hero when you leave at nighttime, but you come in the next morning when the weather's cooler and the dyno's cooler, you're thinking, oh yeah, this is going to be good. And what's wrong now? And then you wear a half a day trying to get that back.
Like a knife in the gut.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think next thing you know, you're thinking about taking the engine apart to figure out what's wrong with it.
Well, it's frustrating because you want it to make sense.
Yeah.
And when it doesn't make sense, like you got to come up with some excuse or a reason. And at times we've come up with a lot of good ones.
You get a little bit cynical, don't you think? Like I know for me anyway, like I tend to question everything. If I make huge power, I'm like, I don't know, is that real? What can I find that may have did that? Or obviously the other way, you're like, man, stupid dyno. It's like everybody wants to blame the dyno,
right?
But I think what happens is you just get really cynical and you just don't trust anything. Everything.
Well, I think that's the right way to be, though. I think if you really, again, you just kind of want to know the truth. That's
I tell people all the time, like nobody doubts the accuracy of my dyno more than me.
Yeah.
No matter what, I'm calling John all the time, going, "Do you think this makes sense?"
Well, the other thing we always get into is, and Mark will agree with me on this. Everybody's dyno reads different. Yes. Like, I don't care where you go. This one's higher. This one's lower. Whether one's right or wrong, it's a big, huge debate. It doesn't matter. Right. But as long as your caliper is the same every day, then that's how you can go forward.
Yep, absolutely. How many times have you seen guys drag engines around to different shops, and go?
We did it when I worked for Mark. We had the key partners. We bought them to every single cup shop, and there was
cup shops who have good dynos, good air systems, good everything.
There's still
I think 25 horsepower difference between 4 cup shops.
Yep.
Wow.
Well, and that tells you right then. Trust your dyno.
Yeah.
Don't listen to what other people say they make unless it's just, dyno numbers are just like the digital calipers or whatever. You just want them to repeat every single day.
And that's hard for a guy like me because I like everything to be logical and make sense. Like you said earlier, I've hung around with Ben enough to know it's math, and that's what I do. I look at the dyno sheet and go, does everything add up? Like literally, mathematically, does it all add up? Well, the problem is that formula might not work on your dyno or
everybody uses different friction numbers.
Sure.
And some use inertia correlation, some don't. So you have a lot of other factors, and then if you are using inertia, have you really done the math on the mass or really tested it? And again, back in the day when I worked for Mark, we pulled them backwards and forwards and steady stated them until the number lined up, and we knew the inertia correlation was correct. So, but you're not going to do that on a pro stock engine.
You figure everything out, But even like you look at like how people do weather compensation, right? You got your weather station, that's great, but like a superflow, they take the friction out, then they do the weather correction, and then they put the friction back in. Like
it's fuzzy math.
There's some different ways to do each of these little.
And the higher the correction is that day, the more that gets added.
100%.
Totally get.
John, we were talking, it was like a year or so ago. I had one on my dyno, and it was really humid, and I was going, man, this thing sucks. What's going on? And I think you told me, why don't you just take it off the dyno and go run the thing and go race?
Well, unfortunately,
you don't get humid.
No, in Arizona, it's very rare. So.
Yeah, and of course the correction factors, it's not made for every single engine. It's different. So
nope.
They all don't react the same to the same weather changes. So you have to interject a little common sense at some point.
I'm short on that though, so I got to call my buddies. So no, but like you make a good point. The weather station for the dyno really is there to correct for the density of air, but we can't necessarily draw a straight line conclusion that the air density changes the combustion process the same way. And so all of a sudden you've got this one size fits all dyno correction factor that isn't really one size fits all.
No.
The one thing we don't, and I don't remember Jason was there one time, but like, we got very expensive dynos, and how good is the air that you're actually putting in there, oxygen wise? Unfortunately, at one time in our life at Joe Gibbs Racing, the Varsol tanks were around the corner, and swear to God, hand on the Bible, that the day they changed Varsol, that we'd lose power. Every single time they came and cleaned it, you could smell it in the air, and we'd make less power.
And who got yelled at, Joe?
This guy. So what happened when the pollen came in the spring and all the cars were yellow?
We actually called the news people and asked them how to measure that, because we questioned that. It was like, why is it? Fortunately, my life, I built the same motors. I built hundreds of them, exactly the same, and we can dyno. And like Jason says, I put 2 horsepower, was a truck rider, because we were that good that we could build 10 of them that were the same.
Yep.
And 2 horsepower was off for us because Mr. Gibbs let me do that way. But it was like when the weather changes, like, again, we have great dynos today, and I'll tell you, January ain't the same as June. It ain't the same. And we have every correction factor. We have everything, all this high-tech, this and that. It's how good's the air today. Drag racers, do you make better runs with trees next to the drag strip?
There's certain places that are always faster, yeah.
Right. There's some things we can't measure, and you have to be able to just say, this is what it is.
I think you told me this. You said, you start out in spring on the dyno, and by fall, the air's all worn out.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what? When winter comes back, it comes right back. New fresh air comes in.
In August, our air is worn out. It's not going to make any power in August. No matter what you do.
Same way. October, November, that power comes right back up.
Back.
So our goal is, like, when we build motors and we're changing things, if we can maintain the same, because my life's different than a lot of people's. Like drag racers, you guys make bigger gains because you can do more things with all NASCAR rules. Is if we can keep the motors running the same through the summer, we know when we get to winter, we're going to see that 2 or 3 that we thought we gained.
But theoretically, so is everybody else, right?
That's what everybody's trying to do. But if you lose it and then you just come back, those changes weren't good.
I think in drag racing, what was interesting is like where John lives, and Warren Johnson lived there also. You'd get in those kind of conditions where it's super humid, right? Those guys would excel. They would run better.
They have to live with it all year.
Because they built the engine unknowingly around these certain constants.
Yeah,
would you say
you get away with more?
Yeah.
Would you say the same for Denver?
I don't know that. Maybe I'd say yeah. I mean, we'll pick on V Gaines. He's not here,
that's
so
what I was thinking about,
he probably ran better there than anywhere else. So
I was going to say, Roy's lives up here in the mountain, and he did pretty good at Denver.
Yeah.
But he told us the story about why that happened last year. So
well, Roy cheated though.
Doug Easton, my shop foreman, he gets mad at me when we test in the wintertime. He goes, "These gains never work in the summer."
Yeah.
He said we should always test in the summertime.
Yeah, I think if you're just aware of it, then at least you have the opportunity to. Self-deception is the most dangerous thing there is. So as long as you don't practice that, I think in the end you'll go forward.
Totally agree.
Well, that's why Dad doesn't trust the dynos. Like the other day we ran this. All right, we're not gonna say what the number is, but he was like, everybody's like, "This is awesome. We really did great." Yeah. And he's like, "That's cool. Let's put it in the car. I'll tell you if it's any good or not." He's like, he doesn't trust him.
But he also came from an era where dynos weren't that trustworthy.
Yeah, it's hard to once you lose that trust, it's very difficult to get it back. But when he puts his foot down the first time, he's going to know it's better.
Yeah. He'll feel that.
He'll feel that. I promise you.
This kind of power in today's numbers is probably considerably better than
Yep. Absolutely. So
takeaways for people at home who are trying to raise their game, obviously eliminate all variables, right, as best as you can, which is impossible to eliminate all of them, but like you guys just ticked off like 10, right? Rapid pollen. I know when you go to Charlotte in the spring race, like there's pollen, and humidity. The cars aren't going to run. Humidity, all of these things. Do your best to eliminate variables. You mentioned that the dyno headers versus like every one of those things can factor into your test.
My biggest thing there is for a guy that's building a mower and taking it somewhere, dyno, go to the same place every time.
Yeah.
Don't, I didn't make power here. Don't go to 5 different shops.
Yeah.
Pick one and just go there because, again, every dyno is different.
The other thing, too, is like how many times you see a guy put an engine on the dyno with a goofy set of headers that looks nothing at all like what you're going to run in the car.
Right.
You know, it's like
Yeah.
you can't really translate that.
Well,
you know,
there is times where you're forced to dyno with a dyno header. Sometimes
Yes.
they won't fit on the dyno.
And the
So.
fuel,
Yeah.
making sure you're using the same fuel you're going to run at the track, and it's not old or something like that. That's representative, because that could be a big difference.
Yeah,
if
Joe,
you
it
really-
really comes back to consistency, right?
Yeah.
Like represent what we're actually trying to do out there on the racetrack and be consistent about it.
If you're really trying to evaluate the engine, you're just eliminating as many variables as you can eliminate. So
absolutely.
easier said than done, but
You got to bang your headers on the ground before you put them on, right? Get all the
Get
rest
the
of it.
Absolutely. Most popular video we've ever done at the Engine Performance Expo, and everyone's heart attack moment when John taps the mild steel headers in the ground
Yeah.
and
All
all
the
the,
rust
dust
comes
comes
out.
out.
But,
they got a pound lighter.
Yeah, that all goes up in the motor. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the deal is, Joe, is be skeptical and be consistent
Yeah.
and try not to pat yourself on the back because man, that'll hurt you. I promise.
I had a crew chief who used to tell me, "Don't believe everything you think."
That's the same crew chief you told you wanted to run the shock dyno because you wanted to run a dyno that they trusted?
No, different venue. But yes, I do remember that.
It's okay to name names.
Yeah,
Jason.
everybody
So-
trusts the shock dyno. Nobody trusts the engine dyno.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, put the engine on the shock dyno. It would be great.
Yeah, exactly.
We were at some racetrack and we weren't running as fast as we thought we should run, and he was, well, this is better, and the crew chief was like, that dyno, I don't trust that dyno. I trust Jason, he was running my dyno at the time. He goes, well, I'm gonna learn how to run the shock dyno. He goes, why is that? He says, at least I run a dyno that you trust now.
That's right.
Because anything Ryan Crook said was gospel, right?
It was on Ronnie Crook's team, so we can go there.
We won't mention his name. What?
Yeah. So, John, what are your have tos and don't dos on the dyno?
Well, you got to be careful looking at that big number. You're looking at that big number. If you know this, everybody knows this, but you take away from down in here at the bottom and you put up at the very end of it, you get that big number up. The car always runs worse.
It's kind of like choosing camshafts, right?
Yeah. Anything you do, at least dyno-wise, anything you do that the power stays the same, but you made it bigger in any way, it'll run worse.
Oh,
100%.
last year,
cams.
when you talked, you mentioned something you had learned from maybe it was Leonard Wood or the guys about that 100 or 300 or 400 RPM before the lowest RPM you're going to see.
Right.
How critical that was.
Yeah, at least that's the way they used to think. I probably still that way, but Leonard Wood told me if you pulled that thing down to 5,500 in the corner, and you didn't do anything but hurt the power at 40 or 5,000, 500 below the least it's ever going to see. If you hurt the power down there to add somewhere else, the car will run worse, even though it never gets that low.
Yeah, that's interesting, but
See, I think it makes sense
That might be more for
because
oval track, but
like in a round track off the corner, like getting everything going again. And I just total layman on this situation, but like that just seems to make sense.
I feel like that's like if you got a big engine on the dyno, like you start the dyno pull and the tune-up's not good and it's a little rough or whatever, they don't ever get better during the dyno pull. Is that what you see? I mean, I don't see them recover.
They don't recover.
It's somehow, it's like you open the throttle and it's rough, you might as well just close the throttle. You're
I
gonna waste
do
your
remember
oil.
one time when we had a little bit better engine package and it made a little bit more power up high, and we gave it to Bobby Labonte. Do you remember this? We gave it to Bobby, and he ran it in practice and said, it's not that good. So we took it back. Mark told me to re-dyno it, so we re-dynoed it. It was within like a horse or two of the last time. We put it in Tony Stewart's car for Richmond, and Tony
first
won.
race with it.
That was his first race win. Bobby finished second, and Bobby said, it did sound pretty good from behind.
So you said something earlier I want to talk about real quick, Jason, is that it didn't make sense to you when people said, well, they can make more power, they just don't run good on the track. Have you ever seen that? Have you ever seen one that was really, really good on the dyno as a dog on the track?
I think if the test is really done right,
Legitimately, yeah.
then no. But Mark will tell you otherwise.
We had a cylinder head guy at Joe Gibbs's that he did a valve job on the exhaust side, and it was definitely better, like majorly better and we went to the racetrack and we ran 25th and 28th. And Mr. Gibbs is just like, what's wrong? I go, man, this is... But when we came back, the intake ports were black. We had more exhaust going up the intake port. The dyno does not do off gas. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
we're talking circle track off gas, not drag racing. I would think drag racing, if that dyno strain gauge shows more, you should run better on the racetrack. I would think.
Again, but
Yes.
to John's point, if you give up 5 down here to
get a
gain
number
10 up there,
You
it's
ain't
a
gonna
loss.
do it. Yes.
Yeah,
You
I
ain't
would
gonna
say
do
if
it.
you legitimately thought it was better
Yep.
in the way we're talking about it,
Yep.
it should go faster down
Yep.
the track.
And I don't know if we were doing it when you were at Joe Gibbs, but like we have a number at this RPM.
Yes.
And
Trust me, it's still planted in my head. How does it come on the page?
Yes,
That was-
but that's a number. If we made more power, we still made number
Yeah.
at that page when it came on, like 500 after it came on the page, 5,500, 6,000. That is where we set camshafts at. That's where we did all that stuff at. So.
Well, I even heard that too. Robbie White, good buddy of mine that lives down in Knoxville, Tennessee, does a lot of the late model, that crate stuff with a hydraulic lifter. A lot of guys were trying to run a heavier oil to keep the lifter from collapsing at the end of the straightaway. He's like, the problem is, when you get off the throttle, it doesn't recover as fast. The lighter viscosity oil maybe that made that higher number at the very end of the pull, but off throttle, it recovers faster. So that low number was going to be better when you went back to it, and it would run better. So it's the little things, right?
Yeah. Well, there's different nuances for, whether it's drag racing or circle track, how the engine is performing. And, the test we're doing is not really a dynamic test. They can do it because they have they have an active dyno, but the rest of us can't do that,
Right.
We're our tool is somewhat limited. So that's where I think experience and a little common sense has to kind of come in.
And again, the old famous statement is read the motor after you take it apart.
Yeah.
We pulled
it tells you a lot.
that first race we went to with that exhaust valve job. We pulled the carburetors off and went, there's something wrong here.
Yeah.
When your intake manifold's black, that's not good.
All right, before we wrap this up, because we could do this one all day, and we got a great video with Ben coming up. Going to do some Spintron work, but dyno nightmare stories. There's got to be a great one from each of you, just like where things went
you
totally.
don't want his. It's a horror story. When it catches on fire, it's not good.
That's why people can't look away from a train wreck, right? We got to increase the entertainment value. So, Mark, you want to share that? John, get one ready.
We've had 2 really bad ones at Joe Gibbs Racing. One of them, our engineers were doing oil tank testing, and we had a GoPro in there measuring, watching oil flow through the oil line, trying to get rid of air in the oil tank. Which, I don't care. This is my above dynoing. The longer the oil's in the oil tank, the more air gets out of the oil. Plain and simple as that.
Yep.
But on the video, you could see the vent cap was never taken off on this new oil tank. And you watched the line, and were you? I don't think. No, you weren't there.
Not there.
I was.
He backed off the gas, and the pressure of the oil tank got so big that the oil pressure went up to like 150 pounds. But as where that clear piece of hose was, it blew apart. And on the video, I wish I'd known you were going to ask this out about the video. On the video, the line is whipping at the very end of the video with an orange flame coming out of it. And the good thing is it was spraying the front of the dyno that Jason actually built for us. Spraying the front of the dyno, nothing happened to the dyno except for the front part of the building because the hose was spraying at the front of the dyno. Second one is always make sure your float bowl screws are tight when you do carburetor testing. Because that one was a big flame, and the people that filled the oxygen or the settling or the bottles that put out the fire extinguisher bottle, they didn't fill it. They something got plugged and we hit the big button and it didn't, and it just about burnt down Joe Gibbs Race.
That's bad.
That was a bad one.
Yep. Yikes.
Yep.
John, you got one?
Oh, we about burnt our place down one night, but I'll be quick. But we were doing a 500-inch dyno for Tony Gillig, and going to crank it, it just banged, blew the top of the plenum off, blew the carburetors off, and carburetors flipped over sideways, and they're upside down. They were on fire. And all that fuel was going on the floor. It busted one of the oil lines on the dyno, or water lines, I mean. So there was water on the floor. So then there was water with fuel on top of it, and it was burning pretty good.
Ooh.
And we couldn't get it out. And our one guy that was there, Bob Gillig, ran out, and they had their race car trailer there. He ran outside, crawled up over the race car, and got their fire extinguisher, because none of ours worked.
Oh.
We had fire extinguisher everywhere. None of them worked.
There's a good tip for everybody out there.
Check your
Nice
fire
little tip.
extinguishers.
Check your fire extinguishers.
Yeah, they were there, but they were all hard in the bottom, you know, all the dry chemical. But we have halon and stuff now, but you need good fire extinguishers.
Jason, what about you? You've never had any kind of problem on the dyno, right? No.
I've had so many that you couldn't possibly have me pinpoint one. There's a lot of them. I've never burned the building down, so that's good, but there's been a lot of them. They used to give me a hard time when I was at Gibbs because we wrecked a lot of them on the AVL. When we first got going.
The one time we were doing balancer testing without a bolt in the front, the balancer came off and it bounced around the room, and I cannot tell you how long a balancer will sit there and spin on the floor.
Long time.
And it will wear the paint off. It will sit there and spin for a long time. After it hit that toolbox, that wall, and landed on the floor,
around.
it sat there and spun for
I got
minutes.
a pretty good video of a crank trigger that ended up in the ceiling a couple weeks ago that came off, and it was buzzsawing around the room like that. So
Yikes.
yeah, it was crazy. Yeah.
Got to be careful for sure.
Got to be careful. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Amazing stuff. Jason, thank you for your participation here at the Engine Performance Expo. We're going to keep on rolling, though. Ben, next video, you on the Spintron.
Megastar. I'm happy to talk about it.
Well, throw to the video.
Okay, here we go. Let's talk about what happens when you make your valve train better.
Exactly.
What a day, what a day, what a day. My brain is swollen. I've learned so much today. They told us, don't start cars. We are not going to listen.